The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, often shortened to Hamlet, ʻhæmlᵻt, is a tragedy written by William Shakespeare at an uncertain date between 1599 and 1602. Set in the Kingdom of Denmark, the play dramatizes the revenge Prince Hamlet is called to wreak upon his uncle, Claudius, by the ghost of Hamlet's father, King Hamlet. Claudius had murdered his own brother and seized the throne, also marrying his deceased brother's widow. Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play, and is often ranked among the most powerful and influential tragedies in world literature, with a story capable of seemingly endless retelling and adaptation by others. The play likely was one of Shakespeare's most popular works during his lifetime, and still ranks among his most performed, topping the performance list of the Royal Shakespeare Company and its predecessors in Stratford-upon-Avon since 1879. It has inspired many other writers, from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Charles Dickens to James Joyce and Iris Murdoch, and has been described as the world's most filmed story after Cinderella. The story of Shakespeare's Hamlet was derived from the legend of ʻhæmlᵻt, preserved by 13th-century chronicler Saxo Grammaticus in his Gesta Danorum, as subsequently retold by 16th-century scholar François de Belleforest. Shakespeare may also have drawn on an earlier, hypothetical, Elizabethan play known today as the ʻhæmlᵻt, though some scholars believe he himself wrote the ʻhæmlᵻ, later revising it to create the version of Hamlet we now have. He almost certainly wrote his version of the title role for his fellow actor, Richard Burbage, the leading tragedian of Shakespeare's time. In the 400 years since its inception, the role has been performed by numerous highly acclaimed actors in each successive century. 3 different early versions of the play are extant: the first quarto, Q1, 1603, the second quarto, Q2, 1604, and the first folio, F1, 1623. Each version includes lines and entire scenes missing from the others. The play's structure and depth of characterization have inspired much critical scrutiny. One such example is the centuries-old debate about Hamlet's hesitation to kill his uncle, which some see as merely a plot device to prolong the action, but which others argue is a dramatization of the complex philosophical and ethical issues that surround cold-blooded murder, calculated revenge, and thwarted desire. More recently, psychoanalytic critics have examined Hamlet's unconscious desires, while feminist critics have re-evaluated and attempted to rehabilitate the often maligned characters of Ophelia and Gertrude. Characters. Plot. Act 1. The protagonist of Hamlet is Prince Hamlet of Denmark, son of the recently deceased King Hamlet, and nephew of King Claudius, his father's brother and successor. Claudius hastily married King Hamlet's widow, Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, and took the throne for himself. Denmark has a long-standing feud with neighboring Norway, which culminated when King Hamlet slew King Fortinbras of Norway in a battle years ago. Although Denmark defeated Norway, and the Norwegian throne fell to King Fortinbras's infirm brother, Denmark fears that an invasion led by the dead Norwegian king's son, Prince Fortinbras, is imminent. On a cold night on the ramparts of Elsineur, the Danish royal castle, the sentries Bernardo and Marcellus and Hamlet's friend Horatio encounter a ghost that looks like the late King Hamlet. They vow to tell Prince Hamlet what they have witnessed. As the court gathers the next day, while King Claudius and Queen Gertrude discuss affairs of state with their elderly advisor Polonius, Hamlet looks on glumly. After the court exits, Hamlet despairs of his father's death and his mother's hasty remarriage. Learning of the ghost from Horatio, Hamlet resolves to see it himself. As Polonius's son Laertes prepares to depart for a visit to France, Polonius gives him contradictory advice that culminates in the ironic maxim, "To thine own self be true." Polonius's daughter, Ophelia, admits her interest in Hamlet, but both Polonius and Laertes warn her against seeking the prince's attention. That night on the rampart, the ghost appears to Hamlet, telling the prince that he was murdered by Claudius and demanding that Hamlet avenge him. Hamlet agrees and the ghost vanishes. The prince confides to Horatio and the sentries that from now on he plans to put an antic disposition on, and forces them to swear to keep his plans for revenge secret. Privately, however, he remains uncertain of the ghost's reliability. Act 2. Soon thereafter, Ophelia rushes to her father, telling him that Hamlet arrived at her door the prior night half undressed and behaving crazily. Polonius blames love for Hamlet's madness and resolves to inform Claudius and Gertrude. As he enters to do so, the king and queen finish welcoming Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two student acquaintances of Hamlet. To Elsinore, the royal couple has requested that the students investigate the cause of Hamlet's mood and behavior. Additional news requires that Polonius wait to be heard. Messengers from Norway inform Claudius that the King of Norway has rebuked Prince Fortinbras for attempting to refight his father's battles. The forces that Fortinbras conscripted to march against Denmark will instead be sent against Poland, though they will pass through a portion of Denmark to get there. Polonius tells Claudius and Gertrude his theory regarding Hamlet's behavior, and speaks to Hamlet in a hall of the castle to try to uncover more information. Hamlet feigns madness but subtly insults Polonius all the while. When Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive, Hamlet greets his friends warmly, but quickly discerns that they are spies. Hamlet becomes bitter, admitting that he is upset at his situation but refusing to give the true reason why, instead commenting on what a piece of work humanity is. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern tell Hamlet that they have brought along a troupe of actors that they met while traveling to Elsinore. Hamlet, after welcoming the actors and dismissing his friends-turned-spies, plots to stage a play featuring a death in the style of his father's murder, thereby determining the truth of the ghost's story, as well as Claudius's guilt or innocence, by studying Claudius's reaction. Act 3. Polonius forces Ophelia to return Hamlet's love letters and tokens of affection to the prince while he and Claudius watch from afar to evaluate Hamlet's reaction. Hamlet is walking alone in the hall as the king and Polonius await Ophelia's entrance, musing whether to be or not to be. When Ophelia enters and tries to return Hamlet's things, Hamlet accuses her of immodesty and cries, "Get thee to a nunnery," though it is unclear whether this, too, is a show of madness or genuine distress. His reaction convinces Claudius that Hamlet is not mad for love. Shortly thereafter, the court assembles to watch the play Hamlet has commissioned. After seeing the player king murdered by his rival pouring poison in his ear, Claudius abruptly rises and runs from the room, proof positive for Hamlet of his uncle's guilt. Gertrude summons Hamlet to her room to demand an explanation. Meanwhile, Claudius talks to himself about the impossibility of repenting, since he still has possession of his ill-gotten goods, his brother's crown and wife. He sinks to his knees. Hamlet, on his way to visit his mother, sneaks up behind him, but does not kill him, reasoning that killing Claudius while he is praying will send him straight to heaven while his father's ghost is stuck in purgatory. In the queen's bedchamber, Hamlet and Gertrude fight bitterly. Polonius, spying on the conversation from behind a tapestry, makes a noise. Hamlet, believing it is Claudius, stabs wildly, killing Polonius, but pulls aside the curtain and sees his mistake. In a rage, Hamlet brutally insults his mother for her apparent ignorance of Claudius's villainy, but the ghost enters and reprimands Hamlet for his inaction and harsh words. Unable to see or hear the ghost herself, Gertrude takes Hamlet's conversation with it as further evidence of madness. After begging the queen to stop sleeping with Claudius, Hamlet leaves, dragging Polonius's corpse away. Hamlet jokes with Claudius about where he has hidden Polonius's body, and the king, fearing for his life, sends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to accompany Hamlet to England with a sealed letter to the English king requesting that Hamlet be executed immediately. Act 4. Demented by grief at Polonius's death, Ophelia wanders elsewhere. Laertes arrives back from France, enraged by his father's death and his sister's madness. Claudius convinces Laertes that Hamlet is solely responsible, but a letter soon arrives indicating that Hamlet has returned to Denmark. Foiling Claudius's plan, Claudius switches tactics, proposing a fencing match between Laertes and Hamlet to settle their differences. Laertes will be given a poison-tipped foil, and Claudius will offer Hamlet poisoned wine as a congratulation if that fails. Gertrude interrupts to report that Ophelia has drowned, though it is unclear whether it was suicide or an accident exacerbated by her madness. Act 5. Horatio has received a letter from Hamlet, explaining that the prince escaped by negotiating with pirates who attempted to attack his England-bound ship, and the friends reunite off-stage. Two gravediggers discuss Ophelia's apparent suicide while digging her grave. Hamlet arrives with Horatio and banters with one of the gravediggers, who unearths the skull of a jester from Hamlet's childhood, Yorick. Hamlet picks up the skull, saying, "Alas, poor Yorick," as he contemplates mortality. Ophelia's funeral procession approaches, led by Laertes. Hamlet and Horatio initially hide, but when Hamlet realizes that Ophelia is the one being buried, he reveals himself, proclaiming his love for her. Laertes and Hamlet fight by Ophelia's graveside, but the brawl is broken up. Back at Elsinore, Hamlet explains to Horatio that he had discovered Claudius's letter with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's belongings and replaced it with a forged copy indicating that his former friends should be killed instead. A foppish courtier, Osric, interrupts the conversation to deliver the fencing challenge to Hamlet. Hamlet, despite Horatio's pleas, accepts it. Hamlet does well at first, leading the match by 2-0, and Gertrude raises a toast to him using the poisoned glass of wine Claudius had set aside for Hamlet. Claudius tries to stop her, but is too late. She drinks, and Laertes realizes the plot will be revealed. Laertes slashes Hamlet with his poisoned blade. In the ensuing scuffle, they switch weapons and Hamlet wounds Laertes with his own poisoned sword. Gertrude collapses and, claiming she has been poisoned, dies. In his dying moments, Laertes reconciles with Hamlet and reveals Claudius's plan. Hamlet rushes at Claudius and kills him. As the poison takes effect, Hamlet, hearing that Fortinbras is marching through the area, names the Norwegian princess his successor. Horatio, distraught at the thought of being the last survivor and living whilst Hamlet does not, says he will commit suicide by drinking the dregs of Gertrude's poisoned wine. But Hamlet begs him to live on and tell his story. Hamlet dies in Horatio's arms, proclaiming, "The rest is silence." Fortinbras, who was ostensibly marching towards Poland with his army, arrives at the palace, along with an English ambassador bringing news of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's deaths. Horatio promises to recount the full story of what happened, and Fortinbras, seeing the entire Danish royal family dead, takes the crown for himself. Date. Any dating of Hamlet must be tentative, cautions the New Cambridge editor, Philip Edwards. The latest date estimate is based on an entry of the 26th of July 1602, in the Register of the Stationers' Company, indicating that Hamlet was lately acted by the Low Chamberlain his Cervantes. In 1598, Francis Meres published his Pilates Timea, a survey of English literature from Chaucer to its present day, within which 12 of Shakespeare's plays are named. Hamlet is not among them, suggesting that it had not yet been written, as Hamlet was very popular. Bernard Lott, the series editor of New Swan, believes it unlikely that he. The phrase "little ʻhæmlᵻt," a contemporary of Shakespeare's, Gabriel Harvey, wrote a marginal note in his copy of the 1598 edition of Chaucer's works, which some scholars use as dating evidence. Harvey's note says that the wiser sort enjoy Hamlet, and implies that the Earl of Essex, executed in February 1601 for rebellion, was still alive. Other scholars consider this inconclusive. Edwards, for example, concludes that the sense of time is so confused in Harvey's note that it is really of little use in trying to date Hamlet. This is because the same note also refers to Spenser and Watson as if they were still alive, our flourishing matricians, but also mentions Owen's New Epigrams, published in 1607. Texts. 3 early editions of the text have survived, making attempts to establish a single, authentic text problematic and inconclusive. First quarto, Q1. In 1603 the booksellers Nicholas Ling and Jean Trundle published, and Valentine Sims printed, the so-called bad first quarto. Q1 contains just over half of the text of the later second quarto. Second quarto, Q2. In 1604 Nicholas Ling published, and James Roberts printed, the second quarto. Some copies are dated 1605, which may indicate a second impression. Consequently, Q2 is often dated 1604/5. Q2 is the longest early edition, although it omits about 77 lines found in F1. First folio, F1. In 1623 Edward Blunt and William and Isaac Jaggard published the first folio, the first edition of Shakespeare's complete works. Other folios and quartos were subsequently published, including John Smethwick's Q3, Q4, and Q5, but these are regarded as derivatives of the first 3 editions. Early editors of Shakespeare's works, beginning with Nicholas Rowe and Louis Theobald, combined material from the 2 earliest sources of Hamlet available at the time, Q2 and F1. Each text contains material that the other lacks, with many minor differences in wording. Scarcely 200 lines are identical in the 2. Editors have combined them in an effort to create one inclusive text that reflects an imagined ideal of Shakespeare's original. Theobald's version became standard for a long time. Traditionally, editors of Shakespeare's plays have divided them into 5 acts. None of the early texts of Hamlet, however, were arranged this way, and the play's division into acts and scenes derives from a 1676 quarto. Modern editors generally follow this traditional division, but consider it unsatisfactory. For example, after Hamlet drags Polonius's body out of Gertrude's bedchamber, there is an act break. Comparison of the "to be" or "not to be" soliloquy in the first 3 editions of Hamlet, showing the varying quality of the text in the bad quarto, the good quarto and the first folio. The discovery in 1823 of Q1, whose existence had been quite unsuspected, caused considerable interest and excitement, raising many questions of editorial practice and interpretation. Scholars immediately identified apparent deficiencies in Q1, which was instrumental in the development of the concept of a Shakespearean bad quarto. Q1 is considerably shorter than Q2 or F1 and may be a memorial reconstruction of the play as Shakespeare's company performed it, by an actor who played a minor role, most likely Marcellus. Analysis and criticism. Critical history. From the early 17th century, the play was famous for its ghost and vivid dramatization of melancholy and insanity, leading to a procession of mad courtiers and ladies in Jacobean and Caroline drama. This focus on character and internal struggle continued into the 20th century, when criticism branched in several directions. discussed in context and interpretation below. Dramatic structure. Hamlet departed from contemporary dramatic convention in several ways. For example, in Shakespeare's day, plays were usually expected to follow the advice of Aristotle in his Poetics, that a drama should focus on action, not character. In Hamlet, Shakespeare reverses this so that it is through the soliloquies, not the action, that the audience learns Hamlet's motives and thoughts. The play is full of seeming discontinuities and irregularities of action, except in the bad quarto, at one point, as in the gravedigger scene. Length. Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play. The Riverside edition constitutes 4,042 lines totaling 29,551 words, typically requiring over 4 hours to stage, versus 2 hours for other plays typical of the period. Even today the play is rarely performed without abridgments. Only one film has adapted a full-text conflation, Kenneth Branagh's 1996 version, which runs for slightly less than 4 hours of action. Language. Hamlet's statement that his dark clothes are the outer sign of his inner grief demonstrates strong rhetorical skill. Artist, Eugene Delacroix, 1834. Much of Hamlet's language is courtly, elaborate, witty discourse, as recommended by Baldassare Castiglione's 1528 Etiquette Guide. The Courtier. This work specifically advises royal retainers to amuse their masters with inventive language. Osric and Polonius, especially, seem to respect this injunction. Claudius's speech is rich with rhetorical figures, as is Hamlet's and, at times, Ophelia's, while the language of Horatio, the guards, and the gravediggers is simpler. Claudius's high status is reinforced by using the royal first-person plural, we or us, and anaphora mixed with metaphor to resonate with the Greek political speeches. Hamlet is the most skilled of all at rhetoric. He uses highly developed metaphors, stichomathia, and in 9 memorable words deploys both anaphora and a syndeton. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. An unusual rhetorical device. Hendiades appears in several places in the play. Examples are found in Ophelia's speech at the end of the nunnery scene, Expectancy and Rose of the Fair State. Hamlet's soliloquies have also captured the attention of scholars. Hamlet interrupts himself, vocalizing either disgust or agreement with himself, and embellishing his own words. He has difficulty expressing himself directly and instead blunts the thrust of his thought with wordplay. It is not until late in the play, after his experience with the pirates, that Hamlet is able to articulate his feelings freely. Context and interpretation. Religious. John Everett Mill's Ophelia depicts Lady Ophelia's mysterious death by drowning. In the play, the gravediggers discuss whether Ophelia's death was a suicide and whether she merits a Christian burial. Written at a time of religious upheaval, and in the wake of the English Reformation, the play is alternately Catholic, or piously medieval, and Protestant, or consciously modern. The ghost describes himself as being in purgatory, and as dying without last rites. This and Ophelia's burial ceremony, which is characteristically Catholic, make up most of the play's Catholic connections. Some scholars have observed that revenge tragedies come from traditionally Catholic countries, such as Spain and Italy, where they present a contradiction of motives. Since according to Catholic doctrine the duty to God and family precedes civil justice, Hamlet's conundrum, then, is whether to avenge his father and kill Claudius, or to leave the vengeance to God, as his religion requires. Much of the play's Protestant tones derive from its setting in Denmark, both then and now a predominantly Protestant country. Philosophical. Philosophical ideas in Hamlet are similar to those of the French writer Michel de Montaigne. a contemporary of Shakespeare's. Artist, Thomas DeLue, Florida, 1560, 1612. Hamlet is often perceived as a philosophical character, expounding ideas that are now described as relativist, existentialist, and skeptical. For example, he expresses a subjectivistic idea when he says to Rosencrantz, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." Speech, where Hamlet is thought by some to use being to allude to life and action, and not being to death and inaction. Hamlet reflects the contemporary skepticism promoted by the French Renaissance humanist Michel de Montaigne. Psychoanalytic. Freud suggested that an unconscious Oedipal conflict caused Hamlet's hesitations. Artist, Eugene Delacroix, 1844. In the first half of the 20th century, when psychoanalysis was at the height of its influence, its concepts were applied to Hamlet, notably by Sigmund Freud, Ernest Jones, and Jacques Lacan, and these studies influenced theatrical productions. In his The Interpretation of Dreams, Freud's analysis starts from the premise that the play is built up on Hamlet's hesitations over fulfilling the task of revenge that is assigned to him, but its text offers no reasons or motives for these hesitations. Beginning in 1910, with the publication of the Oedipus complex as an explanation of Hamlet's mystery, a study in motive, Olivier later used some of these same ideas in his 1948 film version of the play. In the 1950s, Lacan's structuralist theories about Hamlet were first presented in a series of seminars given in Paris and later published in Desire and the Interpretation of Desire in Hamlet. Lacan postulated that the human psyche is determined by structures of language and that the linguistic structures of Hamlet shed light on human desire. In the Bloom's Shakespeare Through the Ages volume on Hamlet, editors Bloom and Foster express a conviction that the intentions of Shakespeare in portraying the character of Hamlet in the play exceeded the capacity of the Freudian Oedipus complex to completely encompass the extent of characteristics depicted in Hamlet throughout the tragedy. For once, Freud regressed in attempting to fasten the Oedipus complex upon Hamlet. It will not stick, and merely showed that Freud did better than T.S. Eliot, who preferred Coriolanus to Hamlet. Or so he said. Who can believe Eliot, when he exposes his own Hamlet complex by declaring the play to be an aesthetic failure? Quote, Joshua Rothman has written in The New Yorker that, "We tell the story wrong when we say that Freud used the idea of the Oedipus complex to understand Hamlet." Rothman suggests that it was the other way around. Hamlet helped Freud understand, and perhaps even invent, psychoanalysis. He concludes, the Oedipus complex is a misnomer. It should be called the Hamlet complex. Quote, in the essay, Hamlet Made Simple, David P. Gaunter turns the tables on the psychoanalysts by suggesting that Claudius is not a symbolic father figure but actually Prince Hamlet's biological father. The hesitation in killing Claudius results from an unwillingness on Hamlet's part to slay his real father. If Hamlet is the biological son of Claudius, that explains many things. Hamlet doesn't become king of Denmark on the occasion of the king's death in Asmachus. It is an open secret in court that he is Claudius's biological son, and as such he is merely a court bastard not in the line of succession. He is angry with his mother because of her long-standing affair with a man Hamlet hates, and Hamlet must face the fact that he has been sired by the man he loathes. That point overturns T.S. Eliot's complaint that the play is a failure for not furnishing an objective correlative to account for Hamlet's rage at his mother. Gaunter suggests that if the reader assumes that Hamlet is not who he seems to be, the objective correlative becomes apparent. Hamlet is suicidal in the first soliloquy not because his mother quickly remarries but because of her adulterous affair with the despised Claudius, which makes Hamlet his son. Finally, The ghost's confirmation of an alternative fatherhood for Hamlet is a fabrication that gives the prince a motive for revenge. Feminist. Ophelia is distracted by grief. Feminist critics have explored her descent into madness. Artist. Henrietta Ray, 1890. In the 20th century, feminist critics opened up new approaches to Gertrude and Ophelia. New historicist and cultural materialist critics examined the play in its historical context, attempting to piece together its original cultural environment. Hamlet tries to show his mother Gertrude his father's ghost. Artist. Nikolai Abildgaard, ca. 1778. Carolyn Heilbrun's 1957 essay, The Character of Hamlet's Mother, defends Gertrude, arguing that the text never hints that Gertrude knew of Claudius poisoning King Hamlet. This analysis has been praised by many feminist critics. Combating what is, by Heilbrun's argument, centuries worth of misinterpretation. By this account, Gertrude's worst crime is of pragmatically marrying her brother-in-law in order to avoid a power vacuum. This is borne out by the fact that King Hamlet's ghost tells Hamlet to leave Gertrude out of Hamlet's revenge, to leave her to heaven, an arbitrary mercy to grant to a conspirator to murder. Ophelia has also been defended by feminist critics, most notably Elaine Showalter. Influence. Hamlet is one of the most quoted works in the English language, and is often included on lists of the world's greatest literature. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, published about 1749, describes a visit to Hamlet by Tom Jones and Mr. Partridge, with similarities to the play within a play. L. Frank Baum's first published short story was They Played a New Hamlet, when Baum had been touring New York State in the title role. The actor playing the ghost fell through the floorboards, and the rural audience thought it was part of the show and demanded that the actor repeat the fall, because they thought it was funny. Baum would later recount the actual story in an article, but the short story is told from the point of view of the actor playing the ghost. In the 1920s, James Joyce managed a more upbeat version of Hamlet, stripped of obsession and revenge. In Ulysses, though its main parallels are with Homer's Odyssey, there is the story of the woman who read Hamlet for the first time and said, "I don't see why people admire that play so. It is nothing but a bunch of quotations strung together." Quote. Performance history. The day we see Hamlet die in the theater, something of him dies for us. He is dethroned by the specter of an actor, and we shall never be able to keep the usurper out of our dreams. Shakespeare's date to the interregnum. Shakespeare almost certainly wrote the role of Hamlet for Richard Burbage. He was the chief tragedian of the Lord Chamberlain's men, with a capacious memory for lines and a wide emotional range. Firm evidence for specific early performances of the play is scant. What is known is that the crew of the ship Red Dragon, anchored off Sierra Leone, performed Hamlet in September 1607. All theaters were closed down by the Puritan government during the interregnum. Restoration and 18th century. Title page and frontispiece for Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, a tragedy, as it is now acted at the Theatres Royal in Drury Lane and Covent Garden, London, 1776. The play was revived early in the Restoration, when the existing stock of pre-Civil War plays was divided between the two newly created patent theatre companies. Hamlet was the only Shakespearean favorite that Sir William Davenant's Duke's Company secured. David Garrick's iconic hand gesture expresses Hamlet's shock at the first sight of the ghost. Artist. Unknown. John Philip Kemble made his Drury Lane debut as Hamlet in 1783. 19th century. A poster, ca. 1884, for an American production of Hamlet, starring Thomas W. Keane, showing several of the key scenes. from around 1810 to 1840. The best-known Shakespearean performances in the United States were tours by leading London actors, including George Frederick Cooke, Junius Brutus Booth, Edmund Kean, William Charles McGrady, and Charles Kemble. Of these, Booth remained to make his career in the States, fathering the nation's most notorious actor, John Wilkes Booth, who later assassinated Abraham Lincoln, and its most famous Hamlet, Edwin Booth. In the United Kingdom, the actor-managers of the Victorian era, including Kean, Samuel Phelps, McGrady, and Henry Irving, staged Shakespeare in a grand manner, with elaborate scenery and costumes. In London, Edmund Kean was the first Hamlet to abandon the regal finery usually associated with the role in favor of a plain costume, and he is said to have surprised his audience by playing Hamlet as serious and introspective. In France, Charles Kemble initiated an enthusiasm for Shakespeare, and leading members of the Romantic movement such as Victor Hugo and Alexandre Dumas saw his 1827 Paris performance of Hamlet, particularly admiring the madness of Harriet Smithson's Ophelia. 20th century. Apart from some Western troupist 19th-century visits, the first professional performance of Hamlet in Japan was Otojiro Kawakami's 1903 Shimpa New School Theatre adaptation. Konstantin Stanislavski and Edward Gordon Craig, two of the 20th century's most influential theatre practitioners, collaborated on the Moscow Art Theatre's seminal production of 1911. 12. Hamlet is often played with contemporary political overtones. Leopold Gessner's 1926 production at the Berlin Staatstheater portrayed Claudius's court as a parody of the corrupt and fawning court of Kaiser Wilhelm. Notable stagings in London and New York include Barrymore's 1925 production at the Haymarket. It influenced subsequent performances by John Gielgud and Laurence Olivier. In 1937, Tyrone Guthrie directed the play at Elsinore, Denmark, with Laurence Olivier as Hamlet and Vivian Leigh as Ophelia. In 1963, Olivier directed Peter O'Toole as Hamlet in the inaugural performance of the newly formed National Theatre. Critics found resonance between O'Toole's Hamlet and John Osborne's hero, Jimmy Porter, from Look Back in Anger. Richard Burton received his third Tony Award nomination when he played his second Hamlet, his first under John Gielgud's direction, in 1964, in a production that holds the record for the longest run of the play in Broadway history. The performance was set on a bare stage, conceived to appear like a dress rehearsal, with Burton in a black V-neck sweater, and Gielgud himself tape-recorded the voice for the ghost, which appeared as a looming shadow. It was immortalized both on record and on a film that played in U.S. theaters for a week in 1964, as well as being the subject of books written by cast members William Redfield and Richard L. Stern. Other New York portrayals of Hamlet of note include that of Ralph Fiennes's in 1995, for which he won the Tony Award for Best Actor, which ran from first preview to closing night, a total of 100 performances. About the Fiennes Hamlet, Vincent Canby wrote in the New York Times that it was not one for literary sleuths and Shakespeare scholars. It respects the play, but it doesn't provide any new material for arcane debates on what it all means. Instead, it's an intelligent, beautifully read, quote. Ian Charleson performed Hamlet from the 9th of October to the 13th of November 1989, in Richard Eyre's production at the Olivier Theatre, replacing Daniel Day-Lewis, who had abandoned the production, seriously ill from AIDS at the time. Charleson died 8 weeks after his last performance. Fellow actor and friend, Sir Ian McKellen, said that Charleson played Hamlet so well it was as if he had rehearsed the role all his life. McKellen called it the perfect Hamlet. 21st century. Hamlet continues to be staged regularly. with actors such as Simon Russell Beale, Ben Whishaw, David Tennant, Angela Winkler, Samuel West, Christopher Eccleston, Maxine Peake, Rory Kinnear, Christian Camargo and Andrew Scott, performing the lead role. In May 2009, Hamlet opened with Jude Law in the title role at the Donmar Warehouse West End season at Wyndham's Theatre. The production officially opened on the 3rd of June and ran through the 22nd of August 2009. In 2013, American actor Paul Giamatti won critical acclaim for his performance on stage in the title role of Hamlet, performed in modern dress, at the Yale Repertory Theatre, at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. The Globe Theatre of London initiated a project in 2014 to perform Hamlet in every country in the world in the space of 2 years, titled Globe to Globe Hamlet. It began its tour on the 23rd of April 2014, the 450th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth. As of the 23rd of February 2016, the project had performed in 170 countries. Benedict Cumberbatch played the role for a 12-week run-in of production at the Barbican Theatre, opening on the 25th of August 2015. The play was provided by Sonia Friedman and directed by Lindsay Turner, with set design by S. Devlin. It was called the most in-demand theater production of all time. The run sold out in 7 hours after tickets went on sale the 11th of August 2014, more than a year before the play opened. Film and TV performances. The earliest screen success for Hamlet was Sarah Bernhardt's 5-minute film of the fencing scene. Laurence Olivier's 1948 moody black and white Hamlet won Best Picture and Best Actor Oscars, and is still, as of 2015. Shakespeare experts Sir John Gielgud and Kenneth Branagh consider the definitive rendition of the Bard's tragic tale. Innocenty Smoktunovsky was cast in the role of Hamlet. He was particularly praised by Sir Laurence Olivier. John Gielgud directed Richard Burton in a Broadway production at the Lunt-Fontanne Theatre in 1964. 5. The longest-running Hamlet in the U.S. to date. A live film of the production was produced using electronovision, a method of recording a live performance with multiple video cameras and converting the image to film. Eileen Hurley repeated her role from Olivier's film version as the Queen, and the voice of Gielgud was heard as the Ghost. The Gielgud-Burton production was also recorded complete and released on LP by Columbia Masterworks. The first Hamlet in color was a 1969 film directed by Tony Richardson with Nicol Williamson as Hamlet and Marianne Faithfull as Ophelia. In 1990, Franco Zeffirelli, whose Shakespeare films have been described as sensual rather than cerebral. In 2000, Michael Älmreid as Hamlet set the story in contemporary Manhattan, with Ethan Hawke playing Hamlet as a film student. Claudius, played by Kyle MacLachlan, became the CEO of Denmark Corporation, having taken over the company by killing his brother. There have also been several films that transposed the general storyline of Hamlet or elements thereof to other settings. There have also been many films which included performances of scenes from Hamlet as a play within a film. Stage pastiches. There have been various derivative works of Hamlet which recast the story from the point of view of other characters, or transpose the story into a new setting or act as sequels or prequels to Hamlet. This section is limited to those written for the stage. The best known is Tom Stoppard's 1966 play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which retells many of the events of the story from the point of view of the characters Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and gives them a backstory of their own. Several times since 1995, the American Shakespeare Center has mounted repertories that include both Hamlet and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, with the same actors performing the same roles in each. In their 2001 and 2009 seasons, the two plays were directed, designed, and rehearsed together to make the most out of the shared scenes and situations. W. S. Gilbert wrote a short comic play titled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. In Hamlet's play is presented as a tragedy written by Claudius in his youth, of which he is greatly embarrassed. Through the chaos triggered by Hamlet's staging of it, Guildenstern helps Rosencrantz vie with Hamlet to make Ophelia his bride. Lee Blessing's Fortinbras is a comical sequel to Hamlet in which all the deceased characters come back as ghosts. The New York Times reviewed the play, saying it is scarcely more than an extended comedy sketch, lacking the portent and linguistic complexity of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Fortinbras operates on a far less ambitious plane, but it is a ripping yarn and offers Keith Redden a role in which he can commit comic mayhem. Karadzić's 12 Ophelias, a play with broken songs, includes elements of the story of Hamlet but focuses on Ophelia. In Svitch's play, Ophelia is resurrected and rises from a pool of water after her death in Hamlet. The play is a series of scenes and songs, and was first staged at Public Swimming Pool in Brooklyn. David Duvall's Wittenberg is a tragical-comical historical prequel to Hamlet that depicts the Danish prince as a student at Wittenberg University, now known as the University of Halle-Wittenberg, where he is torn between the conflicting teachings of his mentors John Faustus and Martin Luther. The New York Times reviewed the play, saying, Mr. Davalos has molded a daft campus comedy out of this unlikely convergence. Quote, Mad Boy chronicled by Canadian playwright Michael O'Brien is a dark comedy loosely based on Hamlet, set in Viking Denmark in 999 A.D. Editions of Hamlet. Fate, Jonathan Rasmussen, Eric, eds. Complete Works. The R.S.C. Shakespeare. New York, Royal Shakespeare Company. ISBN 0-679-64295-1. Fate, Jonathan Rasmussen, Eric, eds. Hamlet. The R.S.C. Shakespeare. The Royal Shakespeare Company. ISBN 978-0230217867. Edwards, Philip, ed. Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. New Cambridge Shakespeare. Cambridge. Cambridge University Press. ISBN 0-19-283416-9. Evans, G. Blakemore, ed. The Riverside Shakespeare. The Riverside Shakespeare. Houghton Mifflin for Riverside Shakespeare Company. ISBN 9780395040025. Hibbard, G. R. ed. Hamlet. Oxford World's Classics. Oxford. Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19-283416-9. Ayres, Kathleen O. ed. The First Quarto of Hamlet. New Cambridge Shakespeare. Cambridge. Cambridge University Press. ISBN 0-521-65390-8. Jenkins, Harold, ed. Hamlet. The Art and Shakespeare. 2nd Series. London. Methuen. ISBN 1-903436-672. Lott, Bernard, ed. Hamlet. New Swan Shakespeare. Advanced Series. New ed. London. Longman. ISBN 0-582-527422-2. Thompson, Anne. Taylor, Neil, eds. Hamlet. The Art and Shakespeare. 3rd Series. 1. London. Cengage Learning. ISBN 1-904271-332. Thompson, Anne. Taylor, Neil, eds. Hamlet. The Texts of 1603 and 1623. The Art and Shakespeare. 3rd Series. 2. London. Cengage Learning. ISBN 1-904271-804. Wells, Stanley. Taylor, Gary, eds. The Complete Works. The Oxford Shakespeare. Compact ed. Oxford. Clarendon Press. ISBN 0-19-871190-5. Texts. ʻhæmlᵻt. The Q2 text, with copious hyperlinked references and notes. Run by the University of Basel. Shakespeare Quartos Archive. Transcriptions and facsimiles of 32 copies of the 5 pre-1642 quarto editions. Analysis. ʻhæmlᵻworks.org. Scholarly resource with multiple versions of Hamlet, commentaries, concordances, and more. The story of Shakespeare's Hamlet was derived from the legend of ʻhæmlᵻt, preserved by 13th-century chronicler Saxo Grammaticus in his Gesta Danorum, as subsequently retold by 16th-century scholar François de Belforest. Shakespeare may also have drawn on an earlier, hypothetical, Elizabethan play known today as the ʻhæmlᵻt, though some scholars believe he himself wrote the ʻhæmlᵻt, later revising it to create the version of Hamlet we now have. He almost certainly wrote his version of the title role for his fellow actor, Richard Burbage, the leading tragedian of Shakespeare's time. In the 400 years since its inception, the role has been performed by numerous highly acclaimed actors in each successive century. 3 different early versions of the play are extant. The first quarto, Q1, 1603, the second quarto, Q2, 1604, and the first folio, F1, 1623. Each version includes lines and entire scenes missing from the others. The play's structure and depth of characterization have inspired much critical scrutiny. One such example is the centuries-old debate about Hamlet's hesitation. The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, often shortened to Hamlet, ʻhæmlᵻt, is a tragedy written by William Shakespeare at an uncertain date between 1599 and 1602, set in the Kingdom of Denmark. The play dramatizes the revenge Prince Hamlet is called to wreak upon his uncle, Claudius, by the ghost of Hamlet's father, King Hamlet. Claudius had murdered his own brother and seized the throne, also marrying his deceased brother's widow. Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play, and is often ranked among the most powerful and influential tragedies in world literature, with a story capable of seemingly endless retelling and adaptation by others. The play likely was one of Shakespeare's most popular works during his lifetime, and still ranks among his most performed, topping the performance list of the Royal Shakespeare Company and its predecessors in Stratford-upon-Avon since 1879. It has inspired many other writers, from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Charles Dickens to James Joyce and Iris Murdoch, and has been described as the world's most filmed story after Cinderella, Temptation to Kill His Uncle, which some see as merely a plot device to prolong the action, but which others argue is a dramatization of the complex philosophical and ethical issues that surround cold-blooded murder, calculated revenge, and thwarted desire. More recently, psychoanalytic critics have examined Hamlet's unconscious desires, while feminist critics have re-evaluated and attempted to rehabilitate the often maligned characters of Ophelia and Gertrude. Characters. Plot. Act 1. The protagonist of Hamlet is Prince Hamlet of Denmark, son of the recently deceased King Hamlet, and nephew of King Claudius, his father's brother and successor. Claudius hastily married King Hamlet's widow, Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, and took the throne for himself. Denmark has a long-standing feud with neighboring Norway, which culminated when King Hamlet slew King Fortinbras of Norway in a battle years ago. Although Denmark defeated Norway, and the Norwegian throne fell to King Fortinbras's infirm brother, Denmark fears that an invasion led by the dead Norwegian king's son, he plans to put an antic disposition on, and forces them to swear to keep his plans for revenge secret. Privately, however, he remains uncertain of the ghost's reliability. Act 2. Soon thereafter, Ophelia rushes to her father, telling him that Hamlet arrived at her door the prior night half undressed and behaving crazily. Polonius blames love for Hamlet's madness and resolves to inform Claudius and Gertrude. As he enters to do so, the king and queen finish welcoming Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two student acquaintances of Hamlet, to Elsinore. The royal couple has requested that the students investigate the cause of Hamlet's mood and behavior. Additional news requires that Polonius wait to be heard. Messengers from Norway inform Claudius that the King of Norway has rebuked Prince Fortinbras for attempting to refight his father's battles. The forces that Fortinbras conscripted to march against Denmark will instead be sent against Poland, though they will pass through a portion of Denmark to get there. Polonius tells Claudius and Gertrude his theory regarding Hamlet's behavior, and speaks to Hamlet in a hall of the castle to try to uncover Prince Fortinbras is imminent. On a cold night on the ramparts of Elsinore, the Danish royal castle, the sentries Bernardo and Marcellus and Hamlet's friend Horatio encounter a ghost that looks like the late King Hamlet. They vow to tell Prince Hamlet what they have witnessed. As the court gathers the next day, while King Claudius and Queen Gertrude discuss affairs of state with their elderly advisor Polonius, Hamlet looks on glumly. After the court exits, Hamlet despairs of his father's death and his mother's hasty remarriage. Learning of the ghost from Horatio, Hamlet resolves to see it himself. As Polonius's son Laertes prepares to depart for a visit to France, Polonius gives him contradictory advice that culminates in the ironic maxim, "To thine own self be true." Polonius's daughter, Ophelia, admits her interest in Hamlet, but both Polonius and Laertes warn her against seeking the prince's attention. That night on the rampart, the ghost appears to Hamlet, telling the prince that he was murdered by Claudius and demanding that Hamlet avenge him. Hamlet agrees and the ghost vanishes. The prince confides to Horatio and the sentries that from now